Hey, it's Matt again. In this video, we're going to talk about how Firebase structures its data. We're going to make some sample data, and then we're going to read it in our app. So first, let's talk about exactly how Firebase structures its data. Firebase is what we call a document-based database, which is a type of noSQL database. These words aren't super important. I do explain them in the notes, which you can check out here or there. But just to quickly let you know what that means, in Firestore, all data is sorted into documents and collections of documents. So a document might be a tweet or a Facebook user or things like that. And you can have individual fields that represent their name, for example, or the content of a tweet, or whether or not a to-do has been completed. And you can also have collections of documents. So tweets, for example, would be a collection of tweets. It's kind of like an array, but not exactly. It's actually closer to a dictionary. So in our to-do list situation, and if as a reminder, this is kind of the starter code that we're starting with, I think the most important collection document system that we're going to have to make is a to-do collection. So a collection of to-dos. So I'm going to head to my Firestore console. You should have gone here from what we did in the previous video. I'm going to hit start collection. And here we have to create a collection ID. And this is important. So I'm going to name this to-dos. And this is what the naming convention I'm going to use for the rest of the tutorial. And I'm going to hit next. And then we're going to have a few things we can do here. So first, a document ID. This needs to be unique for every single document. Eventually, we're actually going to generate this with code, but for now, I think it's fine to have some automatic ID, and we'll kind of deal with that later. Then we can add fields, and fields have associated values. These are kind of like key value pairs in a hash map or a dictionary. I'm just going to say, looking at our to-do right now, each to-do has some like text that we can put in. We can store whether or not it's been strike-through'd or not, and then also these buttons, but that doesn't really affect the actual state of the to-do. So I think so far we only need to have two things. We need to have the actual text, and the type can be a string, and then we need to have a boolean, which is like whether or not it's true or not, and whether or not the thing is complete. I'm just going to create some like super basic defaults, but it doesn't really matter. You can kind of do what you want. Once we're ready, we can hit save, and we'll have created our first document. You can hear now it shows up immediately in the Cloud Firestore panel right here. So this is how you would basically create a collection or a to-do document or whatever visually with a GUI, opposed to programmatically, which we're going to do in another video. So now we have this data. How are we going to read it? Well, now we're going to switch to our app. So I'm going to head back to app.js, and the rest of this tutorial across all of these videos is going to focus just on editing app.js. You'll notice that there's a bunch of code here. If you don't understand what all the code does, that's totally okay. I tried to write it and name things and comment so they make sense, but we're going to only edit a few lines of code actually. And if you write your app properly, it's actually really easy to add Firestore in super simply. So we're going to do a few things. First, at the very top, right under use strict here, I'm going to make a new variable called db. And specifically, I'm going to make it a constant. And then I'm going to say, hey, let's call it firebase.firestore. An attentive person might say, where does Firebase come from? We haven't defined it anywhere. Well, this, if you remember in index.html, you've imported this script tag right here. And this script tag it imports Firebase for you. So not really a problem. Ooh, also, that should be a 3. What this does is it says, hey, let's create an instance of a Firestore working library class, something like that. Specifics aren't super important, but we're going to use this DB reference in the rest of our app. The next thing I want to do is say, okay, when we first load the page, we should get all of the to-dos and then generate them. And a common theme is in the sample code, I made this array called global to-dos. This is like kind of the list of the to-dos. And everything in the app relies on global to-dos. By the end of this tutorial, there's going to be no global to-dos, and we're only going to use Firestore. But let's start first with actually getting the to-dos. I do that here in this function that's called regenerate to-dos, and just gets called every single time the page loads or an action happens. And I'm going to change this, and I'm going to put in some code here, and I'm going to quickly explain what it is without typing it out, because it's quite a bit of work. So this is the code. I'm going to leave it on the screen, but also you can take a look at the notes if you're kind of curious on what's going on. But let's break down what's happening here. So first, we have this DB reference. If you remember, this is kind of the Firestore reference we defined at the very top of the file. Now we're saying .collection to-dos. What does this mean? This means that we're going to get our total Firestore project. we're going to get the to-dos collection. So this is kind of like a pointer or a reference to the to-dos collection. Importantly, we haven't like pulled all of the stuff inside of it yet. This just means, you know, get ready to do something to the to-dos collection. The next thing is we're going to use .get. So this is more this is actually what you would expect. Now we're getting every single file or every single document in the to-dos collection. So this first line right here says let's get everything from to-dos. If you're not familiar with JavaScript, these next few things are going to look a little confusing. But basically what we're saying here is this .then means it's an asynchronous function. It's a promise. If you don't know what that is, that's okay. But long story short, we're saying, hey, once the getting the stuff completes, because it takes some time, we have to ask the database has to find the stuff and then give it back to us, then do something inside here. And the stuff inside here is a function. I'll get back to this in a moment. The other thing we have here is this .catch. And .catch, as you may guess from what you're seeing in the code, is if there's an error getting all the stuff, let's do something else. And we're going to see this all the time. So I'm just going to say right here. We're catching the error, and then we're saying, uh-oh, there was an error. If you follow the tutorial, you should get no errors, so we're chilling. But let's go back to this .then. What's going on here? So this entire thing is an arrow function. If you're new to JavaScript, just pretend this is a function. If you know what JavaScript is, this is a function. And the function takes in one parameter called a snapshot. A snapshot in Firestore is basically the entire contents of a collection or a document at a specific time. And in this case, it's the time that we got the actual stuff. Then we're just doing three things here. First, this line, what we're doing is we're taking the snapshot, we're getting every single document. So snapshot.docs is an array of all the documents inside the Firestore collection. And then we're using this .map function. If you're not familiar with .map, basically it takes in an array or an array-like object, applies a function to every item in the array, and then gives you a new array with like the return values for every single input. Here, we're taking each Firestore document and we're just calling doc.data. And this function just means, hey, you know, give us everything inside the document as a JavaScript object. These two lines are the same as what we did before. So if you remember what was here before I copy pasted it, this line just says, okay, use this to-dos array and generate some strings, and this says generate the button listener. So if you don't know what these do, don't worry about it. Really, this is the main line that's doing all of the code. Okay, great. So now we're ready to check if it works, and if we refresh the page, you'll notice that now we have that write code thing that we made inside this Firestore object. So that's it for this video. Super simple. We created some sample data. We talked a little bit about how Firestore works with documents and collections, and we did our very first Firestore interaction, which is we used a database reference, we got all the stuff in the to-dos collection, and then we just mapped it to an array of the data. That's it for this video. In the next video, we'll talk about creating and updating and deleting data programmatically, so kind of how this works, and it'll be hopefully a lot quicker. I'll see you in the next one. Peace.